New analysis today of the fallout from Charlie Kirk's killing and how the public's reaction may say it all.
The Kirk assassination this week has held up a mirror on our country right now, and it's not a pretty picture, right? The governor of Utah, Spencer Cox, just said on your air that he wonders whether or not this is the end of a dark period or another step toward an even darker period. And the reaction, what happened in the days after, even the hours after the assassination, indicates that it's not the end of a dark period. The country did not come together.
Joining me now, Jenna Arnold, Democratic strategist and author of the Substack The Land of And, along with political commentator Ashley Pratt Oates and Republican strategist and MSNBC political analyst Susan Del Percio. Welcome to all of you. So, Susan, is even the reaction to Kirk's killing exposing how polarized this nation is right now? Are we more divided than we've ever been recently?
We certainly are, Alex. And the one place that is just so disturbing is that it's happening even more with our younger people. And we can't undervalue the importance that Charlie Kirk had to college students and young folks, because he was the only one who really went out there and really sought to communicate with them. And this also happens to be the generation that grew up with gun drills in their schools. So it's very interesting to me to see how much we, as kind of the established older generation, have ignored those needs and shown that we are just no better than we were a week ago.
So, Jenna, there's unfortunately been multiple instances of political violence in recent years. Why is it that Kirk has received this response? I mean, Susan just touched on the fact that he went out to the young people and he was soliciting their presence and talking with them in conversation. But how well known was he even by the general public before this?
Well, it's a fascinating question. And then I would push it just a step further, because that's how I'd like to answer it, which is how well known was he amongst his constituency or the folks that he was trying to reach? What's been so fascinating to me about the response to this current tragic moment is how it seems like folks that represent some of his different target demographics are coming out of the woodwork trying to clarify exactly who he was or what he stood for. So I'm seeing a lot of chatter online from Christian communities trying to clarify some of the things that he said or didn't say that were aligned with their faith-based values. I'm seeing a lot of chatter, obviously, about how he was aligned from a racial or socioeconomic or power-based system. And it seems like a lot of people, a lot of folks outside of his just core audience are like, wait, who is this guy and who did he stand for? And it felt like there was a good 24, 48, even 72 hours where people were trying to really understand his story and his beat. And I think that goes to what the governor of Utah was saying, is that these algorithms have pigeoned us in such dangerous ways that there's, a lack of clarity across the board.
So, Ashley, meanwhile, Trump gave an exclusive interview to NBC News this weekend saying that he would like to see the nation heal. But then he says, quote, "But we're dealing with a radical left group of lunatics and they don't play fair and they never did." I mean, I was going to ask you if there's a mixed message there, but yeah. And how might the president better calibrate as this evolves? What can he do?
I think our democracy is in such a fragile state, Alex, that there really needs to be a moment of unity here rather than a moment of further division. And I think it's so imperative that all of our policymakers take this opportunity to unite the country rather than divide it further. And I think we're living in a time of extreme polarization, as was mentioned by all the guests today. But politics at its core used to be a space, and at least was when I was in college, where you could argue and disagree with someone, but walk away knowing that that person is a human being and maybe even a friend. And that has just evolved in a completely different way.
Why? But why?
Because I think the polarization that's out there, there's this us versus them mentality, and it exists on both sides, and that is to our own detriment. We do not see people as human beings anymore, and that is a fundamental, I think, issue that our country has. And in order to move forward, we need to find the commonalities that unite us rather than the divisions and honestly the differences that continue to divide us. But the more we stay siloed and the more that we continue, again, to find those divisions rather than unite our country, the deeper we fall into this era of political violence that we are now in. So
But look,
I don't know how to fix it, but we need to start having these conversations.
So look, it's a huge issue, Susan, and it's greater than one person to fix, clearly. But does messaging by this president make each side want to dig in their heels even more?
Yes, and it makes each side decide to put blame on the other depending on the circumstance. And when anyone, at this point, Alex, anyone who is blaming, quote, the other side are part of the problem. I don't care who it is. I don't care if it's someone on X who has 10 followers or someone who's on Truth Social who has 1 million. You are part of the problem if you're blaming. I would love to say this is a great time for unity. It won't happen. But maybe, just maybe, if we could stop blaming and just take that as the win and moving forward. And the other, we asked, like, why does this happen? What are we seeing in our elected officials? And when it comes to political assassinations, plural, let's highlight that, plural. It's that right now, everything is under a microscope. And Governor Cox was right when he talks about the dangers of social media. But social media in itself can be good. But it's those who are using it, who are so safe in their seats, who can go on the extreme of either side, know they don't have to worry about an election, which is the majority of folks in the House, by the way, and Senate, and they can continue to go on to get the clicks, to raise the money, to have influence. And it's those folks, again, it is, in fact, on both sides that they use this to their advantage instead of taking care of the people they are supposed to represent, Alex. I
can tell Jenna wants to jump in here.
Yeah, I would double click on the idea that it's everybody's responsibility here. I mean, we have, as a country, both in politics and in parenting, have raised generations to believe that winning and silencing and controlling a debate is actually the metric of success. We have no musculature in this country to actually ask clarifying questions. I've spent the past 10 years of my life trying to figure out how we're going to bring each other back together. And it's certainly not by delivering another data point. And it sits in conversations and questions rooted in, tell me about a life experience that's helped you believe that perspective, or centering that, wow, I'm really afraid. I'll never forget, I was debating Sarah Palin right before the election, this past election, and we were talking about reproductive rights. And I said to her on air, I'm really afraid of that perspective. That makes me so uncomfortable. It doesn't just come down to the numbers. And in the break and then in the green room for hours afterwards, she kept asking, but why are you so afraid? And in that, centering my vulnerability and my fear and my humility, I was able to open up Pandora's box about what that kind of fear might be for so many people outside of my specific demographic even. So the left is as responsible for fact wars, trying to silence others, the othering. I'm willing to very publicly, obviously, say that I'm part of the problem too. I go on right-leaning outlets and I try to deliver blows, and I have been successful. That's certainly subjective. So it's the way that we talk to our kids, to the way that we talk to our sisters, to the way that we talk to people sitting in the pews with us, that this has to be an overall transition from the way that we behave. And I think it's a reflection of our insecurity and how we've devalued ourselves, or the role that our intellect or our interpretation of our own intellect plays in all of this. But nothing anyone's going to say is actually going to move the needle. You have to root it in vulnerability, fear, and emotions.
Okay, as you know, we love to read on this show. We have a banned book club. Our staff loves a good summer read in particular, except last summer we spent all our time reading this, Project 2025. 2 volumes here I've got, because that's how many pages it is. It's more than 900 pages. It's a conservative roadmap for a Republican presidency to reshape the entire federal government. President Trump repeatedly distanced himself from this on the campaign trail last year, despite many of its contributors working on his election team. He's since appointed some of its authors to lead some of the same federal departments and agencies that they devoted long chapters to for the Project 2025 agenda. Russell Vought, who orchestrated the whole project, but also wrote the section on the Office of Management and Budget, now runs the Office of Management and Budget. Brendan Carr, who wrote the chapter on the Federal Communications Commission, now runs the Federal Communications Commission. 8 months into Trump's second presidency, the authors of Project 2025, they kind of feel like their time was worth it because a significant amount of the policy proposals in this thing have already been implemented, with more in progress. President Trump's evisceration of the federal workforce, his focus on establishing a federal government loyal to him, ripped out of the first chapter. His dismantling of the Department of Education and of USAID resemble the plans laid out in this book. The firing of the FBI director in the middle of his 10-year term and the elimination of any sort of independence between the FBI and the White House are written into this book. Trump's war on climate research, it's taken straight from these pages. The April firing of nearly 400 scientists who author the National Climate Assessment, which tells us where we are as a country in the fight against climate change. Page 59. The White House has re-embraced coal as a valuable energy source while pushing solar and wind energy to the side. Page 377. Many of the administration's attacks on abortion rights and contraception access are sourced all the way through this book. In March, the Trump administration pardoned 23 people who were violating the FACE Act, which is meant to maintain open access to abortion clinic entrances and protect doctors and patients from harassment and violence. The Department of Justice was also instructed to largely stop enforcing the law, signaling that will not defend abortion access, even in states where abortion is legal. Page 558. In January, Trump signed an order enforcing the so-called Mexico City policy, a Reagan-era rule that bars foreign aid going to any organization that even discusses abortion as a health care option. Page 260. July's reconciliation bill in Congress was almost like a combo deal for Project 2025's architect. It includes provisions to eliminate subsidies and tax credits for renewable energy, which can be found on page 306, to impose stricter work requirements for SNAP food assistance from page 299, to increase the capacity of ICE detention facilities by 100,000 beds from page 143, to roll back student loan forgiveness and eliminate income-backed repayment options from page 331. All of this adds up to a wildly successful first 8 months for the conservative interest groups and think tanks that joined up to write Project 2025. The Heritage Foundation, which led the project, has wielded influence in Washington for decades, but never as much as it does right now at this moment. And by the way, we're not done. Next month, Heritage is releasing a judicial counter project to Project 2025. It's called The Heritage Guide to the Constitution, which intends to reshape policies and priorities inside the judicial branch as much as it's already done within the executive branch. What could possibly go wrong? I'm joined now by David Pepper, former chairman of the Ohio Democratic Party and author of the timely book, including 2025, Don't Let This Happen, America. He wrote a Substack series on Project 2025. Also with us, Angelo Carusone, chair and president of Media Matters for America, a nonprofit media watchdog, who also, I mean, these guys were on top of it all the time. So, David, let me start with not a detailed Project 2025 question as much as a strategy question. Donald Trump said over and over again, I got nothing to do with it. He said, I don't agree with it at various times. And every single week, Angelo was out there, you were out there, I was out there, telling you the connections between the people who wrote the chapters and Donald Trump and videos of what they said. How do you fight this? He lied about his connection to it, and yet everything that was written in these books is coming to pass.
Yeah, I mean, I think with the exception of shows like yours, this was one of the biggest media screw-ups I've seen in politics in my lifetime, that just simply because he denied the connection, they turned it into a both sides thing, and that really watered down people believing. And the book you see behind me, that I wrote that in desperation for people to actually read, not just read the plan, which no one does, but actually think about what it meant to, schools and vaccines, or a vengeful DOJ. And I was trying to say to people, okay, don't read 1,000 pages. But imagine if the things that Donald Trump was promising and the heritage people were promising were to happen, and it's played out exactly as you were saying, as I tried to write. And I do think it's a real cautionary tale, the media allowing someone just denying it, gutting to both sides, which you didn't do. You made the connections, you connected the dots, and I wish a lot more people had done exactly that.
Angelo, part of it is that it's one didn't need a lot of imagination to cover this, right? It's not a fun read, it's not an easy read, but they actually said the things that they're going to do. It wasn't hidden in deep abstraction. They said what they were going to do, and now they're doing it.
Yeah, and I think on the other part, in terms of even just the coverage and people believing it, is that the more people learned about it, it was wildly unpopular. No one really liked the aspects or parts of Project. I mean, it was universally unpopular. And I think that also fed into the ideas because, well, I mean, everybody puts together a wish list ahead of elections, but no, they couldn't possibly implement these things. And then I think to take a step back, the other part that was so hard about it is that in totality, when you get beyond the individual examples that you cited, and there are so many others, but in totality, it was essentially a plan, not just to change government implement policies, but reshape American society. And that just felt fantastic. Oh, come on, that's just a fantasy. Of course, that's what they're saying, but they're not going to actually try to reshape American society through all of these changes. And I think that made it really hard for people to fully internalize the fact that a vote for Trump and putting Trump in office was actually a vote for putting Project 2025 into effect and all the consequences that come out from there. And
so part of the problem, David, and you've written about this as it relates to states. Some people, the reason Angelo says it didn't seem real to some people is because people didn't associate Donald Trump with that level and depth of thinking about structural organization. But this was written by people who actually do have that. Whether you agree with them or not, these are people who had thought this through. We think of party platforms, but nobody ever takes those seriously. This was a party platform on steroids.
Right. And I also want to say, going back to the theory on states, it tells us everything that they had to, once it became unpopular, and this thing was toxic. Once it became unpopular, they had to deny that they were tied to it.
So, okay, this is interesting, Angelo, because you talked to my former colleague, Jeff Bennett, on PBS about this, and you articulated this very well, in which you said they needed a bad guy and they needed a good guy in Project 2025. The bad guy was the deep state, which, by the way, they articulated exactly who they mean in this book, so it's not a nebulous term. The good guy, not necessarily Donald Trump, but a unitary executive, an all-powerful executive which would fight that deep state.
That's right. And that is a simple story for people to understand. They tapped into the animosity that they had cultivated for so long around the idea of this abstract deep state. And the argument was you need something very clear to fight it. Good versus bad. It's a simple thing for people to rally around and organize with. And that is fundamentally the story of Project 2025. And that's where I think this gets, when we talk about reshaping society, here's a perfect example. There's nothing in Project 2025 that specifically says we're going to use the National Guard to invade D.C. and invade these cities to implement this policy. But when you read 2025 in total, what it basically says is that the unitary executive needs to use the military and military powers to enforce its policies across the country, and in particular in bringing states and cities to heel. And that's riddled throughout it. So what it does is it not only sets up this idea of good versus bad, but then it starts to weave together the types of examples and illustrations that the good guy, in this case, the unitary executive, can step outside the bounds of the norms, break all those norms in order to fight these bad guys. And that is, we're living in the manifestation of Project 2025 come to life right now, beyond just the individual policy prescriptions.
David, I mean, we could all lose a lot of sleep over what was in this, the fact that we warned people and people still voted for it. What is the option? What's the other option? Should people who don't like this have their own Project 2029? What should be done about this?
I mean, I do think we need better short, medium, long-term planning on the pro-democracy side. I think that's very clearly the case. So much of what we do is simply reactive, playing defense and not offense. I've actually seen lists flying around of people starting to think this way. A friend of mine in Congress is laying out, Greg Landsman, who's my congressman, he's laying out a plan on policy. I see others laying this out. I do think we need better planning like this. One of the things, the National Guard is one manifestation, but one of the things that we're completely losing sight of is another example. You know, after John Bolton had his house raided, J.D. Vance was literally saying, we are doing this and we are doing that. Just like Donald Trump is announcing results of the investigation in Utah. That is all Project 2025. Before this, you had the FBI doing that. It was separate. It wasn't politicized. And just those examples show us what we're undermining.
Angelo, and I'm open to any criticism here because that is your job, right? Telling us what we do and don't do right. I tried, but I think this has been a failure of media, right? Like never has anything been more obvious in history. They wrote it all down and they're doing it all. What must we in the media do differently?
I think here's what I would say, right? The best time to plant a tree is 15 years ago. The second best time is today. And so in your segment before, you explained that they're doing it again. They're laying out a new playbook for the courts. And it's not just a set of, independent experts. Justice Alito wrote the preface. 36 judges are contributors to that book. They're going to do it all over again. So what I would say is this. We don't have to self-flagellate, beat yourselves up for all the work in the past. We would instead focus on what can be done and what's coming around the bend. And that is this plan to reshape the courts, and to use the courts as a buttress for all of the work that has already been done to break norms, to break laws, to reshape our society with Project 2025. So you get a do-over. And I think that intro was the beginning of that. But again, it's deep. Not a lot of people are talking about it. They're not raising the alarm. The idea that a sitting justice wrote the preface should be a big deal. And it's not. And I think that is the example. So I wouldn't bombard people with too much information, but we need to focus on a simple story. And for me, it's wildly inappropriate that took place already, and that should be a scandal.
Democrats are signaling they're ready for a fight. Senate Minority Leader Chuck Schumer is taking a far tougher stance than he did back in March when he and 9 other Democrats crossed the aisle to keep the government open. This time, Schumer tells the Associated Press, quote, "Things have changed." What's different now? Well, for one, public support for President Trump's so-called Big Beautiful Bill remains underwater, down 22 points in a recent polls. And the most unpopular piece of that bill, deep cuts to Medicaid, that's colliding with another key deadline. At the end of this year, pandemic-era subsidies under the Affordable Care Act are set to expire. If Congress doesn't act, around 4 million of you could lose coverage, and premiums could spike for another 20 million. With some of the steepest impacts falling on red states. Republicans, already under fire for voting this summer to slash Medicaid, are showing new openness to negotiations, and Democrats say they're ready to seize that leverage. Party leaders are making it clear they're drawing a bright line, no healthcare cuts, period.
House and Senate, Hakeem and I, all of us here in total agreement. What the Republicans are proposing is not good enough for the American people and not good enough to get our votes.
Are you saying that the extension of the enhanced ACA subsidies is a must-have in this September 30th package?
We are saying that the American people are hurting because of how they have decimated health care. We need a bipartisan negotiation to undo that damage. If they try to jam something down our throats without any compromise, without any real bipartisan discussion, they ain't going to get the votes, plain and simple.
Joining us now is Democratic Congressman Brendan Boyle of Pennsylvania. He also serves as ranking member on the House Budget Committee. Congressman, thank you so much for coming back to the weekend. I also want to play President Trump on Friday and how he is viewing these negotiations.
If you gave them every dream, they would not vote for it. That's how bad. I told them, don't even bother dealing with them. We will get it through because the Republicans are sticking together for the first time in a long time. Look, we got I call it the great big beautiful bill that has tax cuts for the middle class. You know, no tax on tips, no tax on Social Security, no tax on overtime. We haven't felt that yet. You're going to feel it really big.
We will get it through because Republicans are sticking together. Well, there aren't enough Republicans in the Senate to get it through, so they will actually need Democrats. You heard what Senator Schumer said, the leader of one of the leaders of your party. Do you believe that they're actually going to hold the line? Because we've heard this tough talk from Senator Schumer back in March and also from other Democratic leaders in the past. But when it comes down to it, Democrats are worried about the government shutting down and what the impacts of that are.
Yeah, well, great to be with you this Sunday morning. And something Donald Trump said, I actually agree with. He said, you're going to really feel it soon. That's right. You're going to feel it when you lose your health care, or if you keep your health care, your costs spike by double digits. That is the reality of the legislation that Republicans passed over the summer. The reason why, as the poll you put up there shows, it is so deeply unpopular, more than 22 points underwater. Now we have an opportunity to undo some of that damage, to stop the pending Obamacare cuts that are about to come down the pike in 2 weeks, which would cause 4 million people to lose their health care and health care costs that go up for tens of millions more. We also have an opportunity to stop the pending Medicare cuts, which are scheduled to begin January 1st. And then finally, the pending Medicaid cuts come next year, which will impact some 10 million Americans. So to me, that's what I'm looking to win out of a government shutdown fight. And the final thing I'll say is Donald Trump, by his own admission, said something that I was going to point out, and that is Republicans in Congress, under President Trump's direct orders, aren't even negotiating with Democrats. Unlike every other resolution that since I've been around in Congress that has led to a government funding resolution, here we have the other side not even compromising with us. So it's pretty clear at this point, they obviously want this government shutdown.
But Congressman, the tough talk of it all, we have heard this from Senate Democrats before, but at the end of the day, they usually fold. Do you really have hope, or have you been told behind the scenes that they are willing to let the government shut down if they don't get these enhanced ACA subsidies?
Yeah, well, I would point out 6 months ago when we were in this position, I voted no, as did every House Democrat, all of our House Democratic leadership. As far as Senator Schumer and the Senate Democratic leadership, I'll take him at his word, and you just saw what he said there. So I do believe that we're entirely united this time, both House Democrats and Senate Democratic colleagues, in making clear that this is a Republican-led shutdown if it happens, and the way to win our support is to stop these devastating health care cuts that are coming in just 2 weeks.
So then, Congressman, there's what President Trump said on Fox, but then there's another specter hanging over these discussions, whether you get what you want on health care or not. And I'm going to bring up something that Michael Joseph Stern said yesterday here on the show related to something that he wrote for Slate in regard to the Supreme Court possibly greenlighting the president's pocket rescissions of funds expressly appropriated by y'all in Congress. And he writes in part, as Congress enters a fight over government funding, Democrats should keep a close eye on the Supreme Court, because if the justices do bless this duplicitous maneuver, there will be little point in negotiating over appropriations that Trump can simply refuse to spend. So, Congressman, even if you do get an agreement, if you get the agreement on health care, on those health care cuts, can you trust that the president is actually going to spend the money in the way that Congress authorizes?
Look, I think this is a very key point, so much so that I wrote my own op-ed more than a month ago for Bulwark that I would refer people to. This rescissions fight, and I know most ordinary Americans, most folks here in my district in Philadelphia, really don't know or don't care what rescissions are, but they're hugely important, because I don't know how I, as a legislator, can reach an agreement with the executive branch on a Monday, provide my vote, and then they turn around the following Tuesday and say, thank you very much. Everything you just agreed to, we're taking back, but we're going to spend in the areas where we want to spend. I introduced this past week with every single one of my House Budget Committee Democratic colleagues the Congressional Power of the Purse Act. That would end once and for all this illegality that is taking place right now on something called pocket rescissions. It would restore the congressional power of the purse, which is clearly the intent of our nation's founders. That's why they put it in Article 1 of the Constitution. So that is something, in addition to health care, that I am fighting for and that I believe needs to be included as part of this overall debate as we get close to September 30th.
So, Congressman, I think I understand what Leader Schumer is trying to do here, which is essentially make this conversation a referendum on Medicaid cuts. But Democrats have taken umbrage with so many different things that the Trump administration has done. I wonder if you feel like making a single concession passes the art of the deal sniff test.
Well, I don't know what the art of the deal sniff test really means. And frankly, from the sounds of it, I don't want to know. The reality is this. We are facing pending Obamacare cuts in 2 weeks. We're facing pending Medicare cuts in a few months, and then Medicaid cuts to follow that. Healthcare for tens of millions of Americans is on the line. I'm doing all I can in order to stop that damage. These so-called moderate Republicans who say after they vote yes for the big, ugly law, they say they want to come back and actually do something to stop the health care cuts. Okay, here's your opportunity. Team with us so that we can prevent these devastating cuts from ever taking place in the first place.
Well, let me just try asking you this question in a different way, which is asking for a single concession sufficient for Democrats?
Yeah, I wouldn't characterize it as one single concession, and I'm really not interested in negotiating against myself, especially when the other side isn't even negotiating at all. By President Trump's own admission, they want a government shutdown. I will say the one refreshing thing about Donald Trump is remarkably, he uses this inner monologue out loud. He tells everyone exactly what he's thinking at any given moment. He wants a government shutdown. He has directed this government shutdown. Republicans control the House, the Senate, and the White House. If and when this happens, it is the Trump Republican shutdown, period.
Congressman, real quickly, just a follow-up to my rescissions question, because we're waiting for the Supreme Court to say whether it's legal or not, what the president has done. If the Supreme Court comes back before the funding deadline and says, yeah, the president can do these pocket rescissions, should Democrats walk away from the negotiating table?
I mean,
I'm sorry, because you're not there. But should you just not talk to them at all?
Yeah, well, first, I mean, I have to say, this Supreme Court of the United States, which gives me no confidence whatsoever, it would be absolutely remarkable if they ruled in that direction, considering previous decisions. Previous courts have ruled on a 9-0 basis against the concept of pocket rescissions or unilateral rescissions. 1975 Supreme Court decision is the controlling law in this matter. There's also further legislation that was passed by Congress even since then. So that would be a remarkable and frankly dangerous development, because it would say that the executive branch is really the only branch of government that absolutely matters. As far as any sort of negotiation, again, I would just refer, believe it or not, to Donald Trump's own words. This is the Republican shutdown that Donald Trump wants. He's openly saying it.
Congressman, last question before we let you go, turning a little bit, and you have done a better job, I think, of talking about the bill, the big, beautiful law. The working families tax cut bill is what President Trump is telling, behind closed doors, is telling Republicans to call it and how to rebrand it. One of the things that I have found interesting, and we've talked about it on this show a lot, is the percentage of Americans who've never heard of the bill. They don't know what's in it. They don't know anything. That seems to give you guys an opportunity here for Democrats to really brand it before Republicans actually get out there, even if people aren't going to feel the negative impacts of that. What does that look like for you?
Yeah, well, just to be clear, the main headline is this is a bill that takes health care away from millions in order to fund tax cuts for the top 1%. So if you're a multimillionaire or a billionaire, you make out great as a part of this legislation. But if you're an ordinary American, you're seeing your costs go up, including losing your health care. I would point out the Congressional Budget Office found that for the bottom 1/3 of households by income, they will actually be worse off by Trump's so-called big, beautiful bill, a bill so unpopular. Just 2 months after its passage, he is already trying to come up with a new name. His rebrand on this bill is going about as well as Cracker Barrel's rebrand.
Oh,
not Cracker Barrel.
Congressman Brendan Boyle with a
Beating up on
preview.
Cracker Barrel on Sunday.
Joining me right now, we have New York Times White House correspondent Luke Broadwater. We also have investigative profiler Casey Jordan. So thank you both for being here. Casey, we heard the Utah governor say the suspect isn't cooperating. Would there be an expectation of cooperation in situations like this? And how would investigators then approach him? Do they talk to him? Do they not talk to him at all? And what's the focus then of the investigation if he's not helping?
Well, if you were accused of assassination and murder and everyone was on record, both the governor and the president, saying they were going to pursue the death penalty, I don't think you'd be talking either. He's not going to help them out because there's absolutely no incentive to help him out. If they want to take death penalty off the table and probably use his family and the family friend, the minister, who were able to get him to essentially confess to them and agree to be arrested, that would probably be the best way to get answers. You know, we keep asking what the motive is, and right now it's a lot of conjecture. We're getting more information all the time, and there will be more evidence as things come in. Of course, he has an attorney, but he's not going to cooperate until there is some incentive to do that, and we're not going to know the motive until it comes out of his mouth. That is the only way we will know for sure what was on his mind when he committed this alleged horrific act.
If we ever do. So, Luke, you write that President Trump placed the blame for Kirk's killing squarely on his political opponents. Trump has long made clear unity is not the mission of his presidency. Americans have long looked to a president to unite the country in times of crisis and tragedy. So what is the effect of divisive rhetoric on the crisis of political violence that we are facing?
Right. Well, it can have the effect of throwing more fuel on the fire. We've seen presidents in the past at a time of national tragedy try to bring the country together, try to unify the country, or say things like Islam is not the enemy, Islamic terrorism is, right? Drawing some distinction there between people and the ideology, right? In this case, Donald Trump is saying the left is the problem. He's talking about radical leftists. He's using broad terms to talk about political opponents or political rivals and not saying things like, well, the Democrats aren't our enemy, the left isn't our enemy, it's radical violence from a limited number of people that is the enemy. He's making no distinction like that. And so that can have the effect of pouring more gasoline on a fire that's burning in this country of political hatred.
And Casey, Senator Mark Kelly today noted that the shooting of video of the shooting is, quote, all over social media. You can't scrub versions of the footage from all platforms. So does that concern security officials? And how much could that factor in when it comes to other potential copycats?
Well, we do know that there are people out there who are in that same mindset, ostracized, isolated, perhaps addicted to gaming and internet. I mean, he was living on the internet. He had very little contact with the outside world. And when we talk about copycats, I dislike this word because it makes it sound like the minute that they see something on the news about a previous shooting, whether it is, you know, the CEO of United Healthcare or a Catholic school in Minnesota, that they suddenly decide they're going to copy it. It's not like that. The idea has been there all along, smoldering and festering. And what happens is that they get inspired. Almost always we see that they have researched similar shootings, and that is probably why we see the writing on the guns, writing on the ammo. He is emulating, yes, copying, but these other actions on the internet shown over and over and over again do inspire like-minded people. So there's a lot to be said for scrubbing it, for keeping it down, and actually for moving on. Let the wheels of justice, due process, do their job without access from the public all the time, because there are a lot of minds out there. There are fallow gardens for a lot of this violent rhetoric and political rhetoric. So, you know, go outside and touch grass, but then stay outside in the pasture.
Right, as the Utah governor said. So, Luke, when you write that Trump condemned Kirk's murder, you write that he spoke of the tragic consequence of demonizing those with whom you disagree day after day, addressing violence against the right with no mention of recent violence against Democrats. So what did Trump exclude, and what does it reveal about his views on political violence?
Right. Well, he in his speech from the Oval Office, he condemned the demonization of one's opponents, which I think, many researchers saw as a welcome statement. That's part of the problem in this mess as a country, that we way too often dehumanize and demonize our political rivals. But then he pivoted to saying listing only acts of violence that seem to stem from the left. Right. So he ticked off a number of examples, the shooting of Steve Scalise and Republicans at the baseball practice in Congress, a number of other examples. But he made no mention of, the attack on Paul Pelosi, or the firebombing of Josh Shapiro's house, or the killing of the Minnesota lawmakers and the shooting of lawmakers in Minnesota. So he seemed to be trying to create an image where there's only one side that's violent in America. And we know that that's not true. Every study has shown political violence in America runs every conceivable direction: right on left, right on right, left on left, left on right. And sometimes there's not even a clear ideology. It's a mishmash of sort of insane ideas gained from the internet. Yeah. But what they all do have in common is that somebody had access to a gun, typically, and they were online constantly filling their head with all sorts of hateful ideas about other people.
Can I get from you, Casey, your thoughts on the best avenue for healing or unifying this country?
Okay, let's just start with the obvious. Love your children, no matter who they are or what they are. It's okay to condemn acts, but we don't condemn people, certainly for not their beliefs and not for their sexual identity or gender identity. I think the biggest thing we have found out in the last day that's really, to me, brought it all together, because I always thought this attack was more personal than political, is that the alleged shooter is in a relationship with his roommate. They're romantic partners, and that his partner is transitioning from male to female. Make of that what you will. This, to me, brings it all together. He lives in a community, and perhaps with a family, for which his identity is an aberration. So everyone, especially parents, need to step back and love your children, no matter who they are, because ostracism and alienation is what causes that fallow ground where the violence can take hold. So just love
I have
your
a
kids.
feeling that if we had more time, you could probably list 20 things we could all be doing, but that certainly is a good one to start. As the mother of two, I got to say, you've got to love your kids the way they are, and then they'll love you back, and it's good. All right. Thank you very much. Casey, Luke, thank you so much.